The late afternoon sun cast long, sterile shadows across the polished concrete floors of Eleanor Vance's apartment. From her perch on the 57th floor, Manhattan was a silent, glittering map of power and ambition, a world she had conquered. But inside, the air was cold and still. The space was a monument to minimalist design, all glass, steel, and shades of grey, where every object sat in its designated place with geometric precision. It was a home built to be admired, not lived in, a fortress of order that kept the messy, unpredictable chaos of human emotion at bay. The only sound was the faint, distant hum of the city below, a reminder of a world that felt a million miles away. In this pristine, silent kingdom, Eleanor stood by the window, a figure as controlled and immaculate as her surroundings, waiting for the one small daily disruption to her perfect order. Maya Ramirez stood by the door, her simple coat already on, her bag clutched in her hand. Her face, framed by dark hair, held a quiet exhaustion that her gentle smile couldn't entirely hide. "He had a good day, Miss Vance. We finished the puzzle he was working on," she said, her voice soft but clear. Eleanor turned from the window, her expression unreadable. "I need you to stay late tonight, Maya. An investor call was moved up." It wasn't a question, but Maya's response was, as always, unwavering. "I'm sorry, Miss Vance, but I can't. I have to leave now." The polite refusal, delivered without fluster or apology, was a familiar thorn in Eleanor's side. It was illogical, it was inefficient, and for a woman who controlled a multi-million-dollar tech empire, it was an infuriating, inexplicable anomaly in her otherwise predictable world. A flicker of suspicion, cold and sharp, ignited in Eleanor's mind. For weeks this had been the pattern, punctual to the second, impeccable in her work, but utterly inflexible about her departure time. What could be so important? Another job, perhaps one that paid. Better? A secret life that demanded her presence with such unyielding urgency. Eleanor's mind, trained to identify and eliminate inefficiencies, saw Maya's boundary not as a personal need, but as a professional liability, a loose thread in the fabric of her well-managed life. She watched Maya give a final warm smile before slipping out the door. The quiet click of the lock echoed in the vast silence. In that moment, a decision formed, not from malice, but from a cold, consuming need to understand, to solve the puzzle of the nanny's quiet defiance. She grabbed her keys and a sleek black coat, her movements swift and purposeful. Following from a distance, Eleanor felt like an intruder in a world that was not her own. She trailed Maya from the sterile, marble-floored lobby of her building into the chaotic, pulsing heart of the city's subway system. The scent of ozone and damp concrete replaced the clean, filtered air of her apartment. The quiet hum of her high-rise was swapped for the screech of metal on tracks and the murmur of 100 different conversations. Eleanor, accustomed to the insulated privacy of her town car, pulled the collar of her coat tighter, a stranger in a sea of weary commuters. She watched Maya navigate the crowd with a practiced ease, her small frame moving with a determination that seemed at odds with her gentle demeanor. It's remarkable how little we truly know about the people who walk beside us every day, each carrying a silent story we never think to ask about. If you feel that these are the stories that matter most, subscribing to our channel allows us to continue sharing them. The subway car rattled and swayed, a metallic beast hurtling through the city's dark veins. For Eleanor, the journey was a descent into a world she only ever saw from her high-rise window. When the doors hissed open, she followed Maya onto a platform in the Bronx. The air here was different, thick with the smells of street food and exhaust, a stark contrast to the sterile, perfumed atmosphere of her own neighborhood. The buildings were older, closer together, their brick facades etched with the stories of generations. People moved with a different rhythm, a blend of weariness and resilience that was foreign to her. Eleanor, in her tailored coat and silent, expensive shoes, felt like a phantom, an observer from another dimension, acutely aware that she did not belong in this landscape of authentic, unfiltered life. Maya's pace never faltered, her steps certain as she navigated the familiar streets. Her destination soon became clear, a sprawling public hospital, its concrete and brick structure looming under the dim city lights. It was a place of utility, not comfort, built to serve the masses, and its age showed in the weathered exterior and the flickering fluorescent sign that read, "Emergency." Eleanor stopped across the street, a cold knot tightening in her stomach. This was more than a casual follow. It was a profound intrusion. Every instinct she had, honed in the cutthroat world of business, screamed at her to retreat, to return to the safety of her ordered life. But the image of Maya's unwavering politeness, her quiet refusal, held her captive. She had to understand. Slipping through the automatic doors behind her family, Eleanor was immediately immersed in a symphony of controlled urgency. The scent of antiseptic cleaner was sharp, failing to mask the underlying scent of illness and anxiety. Nurses in practical scrubs moved with a swift, focused energy, their voices calm but firm. The linoleum floors, polished to a dull sheen, reflected the harsh overhead lighting. In this environment, Eleanor's power and wealth were meaningless. She was just another face in the crowd, her expensive attire invisible to those preoccupied with matters of life and death. She followed the signs for the chronic care wing, her heart pounding a nervous rhythm against her ribs, feeling smaller and more insignificant. With every step she took into this domain of human fragility, from the end of a long, quiet corridor, she saw it. Through the small, rectangular window of a patient room door, she saw Maya. She was not on her phone or taking a break. She was seated in a simple visitor's chair, her posture attentive and loving. In the bed lay a woman, her body frail and diminished by illness, her face turned away, a landscape of pale skin and thin, dark hair spread across the pillow. Eleanor watched as Maya reached out and gently took the woman's hand, her touch conveying a world of comfort and reassurance. The sight was so intimate, so profoundly personal, that Eleanor felt a sharp, painful pang of guilt for her trespass. This was not a secret second job. This was a sacred duty. Maya leaned in closer, her voice a soft murmur that barely carried through the thick glass of the door. She was reading from a book, the words flowing in a gentle, steady stream. It was the same soothing cadence she used. When reading stories to Eleanor's nephew, a voice filled with a patience that seemed infinite. The woman in the bed, her mother, stirred slightly, her head tilting toward the sound as if it were a beacon in a fog of pain. In that sterile, impersonal room, under the cold, unforgiving light, Eleanor witnessed an act of pure, unconditional love. It was a force more powerful than any market trend or corporate strategy, a currency she had long forgotten how to trade in. It was a quiet, relentless devotion that made her own world of structured, emotionless efficiency feel utterly impoverished. The truth of it struck Eleanor with the force of a physical blow, knocking the air from her lungs. Her suspicion, which had felt so logical and justified just hours before, now revealed itself as a petty, ugly thing. She felt a hot wave of shame rise from her chest to her face. Maya's inflexibility, her refusal to stay late, wasn't a professional slight or a sign of disloyalty. It was an act of profound loyalty to the one person who needed her most. Her daily smile was not a simple courtesy. It was a testament to her incredible strength, a brave front against a private sorrow Eleanor could never have conceived. It's a painful lesson to learn how wrong our assumptions can be, how easily we build false narratives about others. If you've ever felt the weight of a story that needed to be understood, subscribing to this channel helps us to keep telling them. She turned and walked away, her movements stiff and robotic. She fled the hospital corridor, the building, the entire block, moving without thought or direction until the cold night air shocked her back to her senses. The image of Maya at her mother's bedside was seared into her memory, and it unlocked a door in her own mind, one she had kept bolted for over 2 decades. Suddenly, she was a teenager again, standing in a different hospital room, this one private and expensive, but just as filled with despair. She remembered the sterile smell, the rhythmic beeping of the machines, and the overwhelming feeling of helplessness as she watched her own mother slip away, powerless to stop it, armed with nothing but a child's desperate love. That crushing impotence was the ghost that had haunted her entire adult life. She had built an empire of control, of logic and efficiency, all to ensure she would never feel that helpless again. She had mistaken emotion for weakness, vulnerability for a fatal flaw, because the last time she had allowed herself to feel so deeply it had ended in unbearable loss. But what she had just witnessed in Maya was not weakness. It was the very definition of strength. It was love, not as a vulnerability, but as a reason to endure, to fight, and to show up day after day, no matter the cost. In that moment, the foundation of Eleanor's world began to crack, threatening to bring the whole, cold, empty fortress down. The following morning, Eleanor's routine was shattered. She bypassed her office, the gym, the entire structured rhythm of her day. Instead, she found herself behind the wheel of her own car, a sleek, powerful machine she rarely drove herself, heading back towards the Bronx. The act of driving, of navigating the city's arteries herself, felt like a deliberate reclaiming of her own agency, a departure from the passive, chauffeured existence she had curated. She parked a few blocks from the hospital, the engine's hum dying into a profound silence. She sat for a long time, hands gripping the leather-wrapped steering wheel, realizing this was the first decision she had made in years that wasn't motivated by profit or strategy, but by a simple, terrifyingly unfamiliar human impulse. She walked into the hospital with a renewed sense of purpose, her usual commanding presence now softened by a quiet resolve. She sought out the hospital administrator's office, her voice calm and measured as she introduced herself. She used a veil of professionalism, explaining she was an agent for an anonymous benefactor looking to make a targeted donation. It was a language she understood, a way to navigate this emotional territory with the tools she possessed. She inquired about the patient in the chronic care wing, the mother of a young woman named Maya Ramirez, framing her questions with a detached professional curiosity that masked the turmoil within her. The administrator, a man whose face was etched with the fatigue of fighting a perpetually losing battle against budgets and bureaucracy, pulled up the patient's file. He spoke of a severe degenerative condition, of a cascade of complications, and of the one viable treatment option available. It was a new, highly specialized procedure, and its cost was astronomical, far beyond what the family's meager insurance would cover or what the hospital's limited aid could provide. He described Maya's tireless efforts, her endless appeals, her refusal to accept the cold finality of the system's verdict. He spoke of her with a weary admiration, as one of the many who fought impossible battles within his walls every day. Eleanor listened to every word, her expression unreadable. She saw the figures on the administrator's screen, a string of numbers that represented an impossible barrier for Maya, but for her was merely a business expense. The disparity was obscene. In that moment, the cold logic that had governed her life finally aligned with the new, burgeoning empathy in her heart. This was a problem she could solve. "The fund I represent will cover the entire cost of the treatment," she stated, her voice devoid of emotion but carrying the weight of an unbreakable vow. "And it will do so on the strict condition of complete anonymity." The administrator stared, speechless, as Eleanor authorized the transfer, a silent, decisive act that felt more powerful and more right than any deal she had ever closed. The fragile piece Eleanor's anonymous gift had purchased was shattered by the shrill, insistent beep of a monitor. Maya's mother had taken a sudden, critical turn. The doctors spoke in urgent, clipped tones about an unforeseen complication, an emergency surgery that was her only chance. The cost was another insurmountable mountain, and Maya felt the familiar, crushing weight of despair press down on her, stealing her breath. As she stood numbly in the hallway, a well-meaning nurse, trying to offer a sliver of hope, mentioned the hospital's mysterious benefactor. A real powerhouse, the nurse said, scrolling through her phone. Look, she was in a business magazine. She held up the screen, and there, staring back at Maya, was the cool, composed face of Eleanor Vance. The world tilted on its axis. The quiet kindness, the anonymous generosity. It was a secret held by the woman she saw every day. Fueled by a whirlwind of gratitude, betrayal, and raw humiliation, Maya found Eleanor in a quiet waiting area, staring out a window as if observing a world she wasn't part of. Maya's steps were silent on the linoleum, but Eleanor seemed to sense her presence, turning slowly. "Miss Vance," Maya began, her voice tight, trembling with the effort to remain steady. "The donation, it was you. It wasn't a question." The accusation hung in the sterile air between them. "Why? Was I a project for you? A charity case to make you feel better about all your money?" Tears of anger and confusion streamed down her face. "You followed me. You invaded my life, my most private pain. And then you tried to buy your way into it, like it was just another transaction. You have no idea what it feels like to be on my side of this." For the first time since Maya had known her, the carefully constructed mask of Eleanor Vance crumbled. There was no sharp retort, no cold, logical explanation. Instead, a deep, forgotten pain surfaced in her eyes, a vulnerability that was utterly disarming. She didn't look at Maya as an employee or a project, but as a fellow human being who understood a specific, hollowing kind of grief. The sterile hallway seemed to fade away, replaced by the ghost of another hospital room from long ago. Eleanor took a hesitant step forward, her own composure gone, her voice barely a whisper when she finally spoke. "You're right," she admitted, the words raw and unpolished. "I had no right. But it wasn't about the money, Maya. It was never about the money. It was about what I saw in you." Eleanor's gaze met Maya's, stripped of all authority and pretense. "I didn't do this out of pity," she confessed, her voice thick with an emotion Maya had never heard from her. "I did it because you reminded me of what truly matters. You have something, a strength, a love, that all my money can't buy. When I was a teenager, I watched my own mother die in a room just like this one, and I was helpless. I couldn't do anything. I built my whole life on never feeling that helpless again." She paused, the confession hanging in the air, a raw and honest plea. "Please, let me help, not as your boss, not as a benefactor, but as someone who understands your pain." In that moment, the vast chasm of wealth and status between them simply vanished, replaced by the simple, powerful bridge of shared human experience. The anger drained from Maya's face, replaced by a profound, weary understanding. She saw not a powerful CEO, but a woman haunted by her own past, reaching out from a fortress of loneliness. She nodded, a single, silent gesture of acceptance. It was no longer a transaction of charity, but an alliance forged in a hospital corridor, a promise between two women who had seen the worst of life and were now choosing to face it together. The decision was made. Eleanor made the call, her voice once again calm and efficient. But this time it was not the sound of corporate power, but of profound personal commitment. The surgery would happen. Seeing two people find common ground in their deepest pain reminds us of our shared humanity. If these are the stories that give you hope, subscribing ensures we can bring more of them to light. The long hours of the surgery passed in a blur of stale coffee and shared silence. In the sterile, impersonal waiting room, the final barriers between Eleanor and Maya crumbled into dust. They were no longer boss and employee, but two women bound by a shared, terrifying hope. Eleanor found herself speaking of her own mother, sharing memories that had been locked away for over 20 years, the words feeling foreign and yet profoundly necessary on her tongue. When the surgeon finally appeared, his scrubs a pale green against the stark white walls, his tired face breaking into a relieved smile, the wave of relief that crashed over them was mutual. In that moment, as Maya wept with gratitude, Eleanor saw not a subordinate, but a reflection of a strength and love she was now inextricably a part of, a silent partner in this hard-won victory. Eleanor's transformation rippled outward, reshaping the cold, sterile landscape of her life. Her apartment, once a monument to emotionless order, began to breathe. A soft, colourful throw blanket appeared on the severe grey sofa. A framed photograph of Maya and her mother, laughing in the hospital garden, found a home on a previously barren end table. When Maya's mother was finally discharged, it was not to her cramped Bronx apartment, but to a bright, comfortable guest suite Eleanor had prepared, overlooking the park. The quiet hum of the city was now accompanied by the sounds of conversation, the scent of home-cooked meals, and the easy rhythm of shared daily life. Eleanor, the architect of a solitary empire, found herself rediscovering the simple, profound architecture of family, not as a painful memory of loss, but as a living, breathing source of unexpected joy. 2 years later, the sterile white of the hospital was a distant memory, replaced by the vibrant green of a sun-drenched park. Eleanor sat on a picnic blanket, watching Maya and her mother, now healthy and radiant, argue playfully over a deck of cards. The scene was one of effortless belonging. Maya was no longer a nanny, but the compassionate and capable executive director of the Kindred Ties Foundation, an organization Eleanor had founded and funded. It was dedicated to helping families navigate the overwhelming financial and emotional burdens of chronic illness, ensuring that no one had to choose between their loved one's health and their own ruin. Eleanor's tech company had also changed, its culture now reflecting a humanity and flexibility that had paradoxically made it more innovative and successful than ever before. As she watched Maya place a gentle hand on her mother's shoulder, a genuine, unburdened smile spread across Eleanor's face, a warmth that reached deep into her eyes. She had started this journey driven by a cold, analytical need to understand an anomaly in her perfectly controlled world. She had followed a woman out of suspicion, and in doing so, had followed a path back to her own heart. She learned that the greatest wealth wasn't measured in stock prices or market share, but in the depth of human connection. In her quiet, anonymous attempt to save another family, she had ended up saving herself from a fortress of loneliness she hadn't even realized she was trapped in. It's stories like this that prove the most profound healing comes when we choose to look beyond ourselves, and subscribing is what allows us to keep sharing these essential truths.